Karma Brown is an award-winning journalist and best-selling author of 5 novels, including her latest, Recipe for a Perfect Wife, which was a national #1 bestseller. Karma lives in Oakville with her family and is currently working on her first nonfiction book, The 4% Fix: How 1 Hour Can Change Your Life, which will be out this December 2020. Welcome to the show, Karma.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I feel people are at home right now with more time to read than ever.
Yes.
And I am currently actually not reading your book. I'm actually listening to your book on Audible. And I am loving Recipe for a Perfect Wife. So I really wanted to talk to you about sort of your inspiration for that book. And it reminded me of something my mother always says: the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yes.
And particularly with women.
Yeah, that is a perfect way to describe sort of how I was feeling when I was writing this book. Yeah.
Right. So what inspired that then?
Well, I mean, initially, I have all these old cookbooks, these vintage cookbooks, some of which have been passed down through my family and other ones that I picked up at used bookstores. And I love cookbooks. And in particular, I love these old books that have the notations that people will write in the margins, when they've had a special meal for a birthday and they say excellent and on this date, and all the spills that are through the pages. So initially, I was inspired by this idea of this vintage cookbook and this 1950s woman this was a gift, given to her when she got married, and she would cook for her husband out of this book. And she seemed the very quintessential housewife to me on the surface when I first met her in my brain, as this 1950s housewife. But then I started wondering about what her life looked like underneath the surface of that, and that were women really as happy as they're made out to look in these magazine ads and in some of these shows that we've watched about that era in particular? What was happening for them, and how were they, what was important to them outside of just this role of being the housewife, and that was what inspired me for the 1950s part. And then I started thinking, well, how far have we come from the way that women were in the 50s, from this idea that women are in the house, they raise the children, they keep the house clean, they make sure dinner's on the table for their husband. Outside of that, their aspirations can be Tupperware parties and knitting circles and church groups, and that's it, right? So we've come far in some ways because women now have an opportunity to do so much more than they did. But at the same time, perhaps we've not come as far as we think. And how are women still not equal, in so many ways? So by doing a dual narrative with this book, it gave me the opportunity to explore marriage in both those scenarios and in those times.
Yeah, and it's funny, we tend to glamorize the 1950s as this golden age. And really for women, it was really quite oppressive. However, again, by looking at 2 timelines, it's still fairly oppressive. I mean, sure, we've been freed up to work outside the home, but we've probably quadrupled our workload for a lot of women who are doing it all at home still.
Yes, and that actually that's exactly what it shows. When you take couples where both people work outside of the home, equal number of hours full time, inside the home, the women are still doing a substantially bigger amount of work when it comes to the domestic stuff, the emotional labor, childcare, meal prep. Women are still doing more than men, even when they work the same hours. And, the 50s, like before that, the women had been in all of these different jobs because the men had gone to war, and women were required to come out of the kitchen to be able to then take over the jobs that the men had left when they went to war. Then the men came back and the women suddenly went back into the kitchen, where they stayed for a good 20 years until we hit that second wave of feminism in the 70s and things started to shift. But like you said, with the present day, we are allowed, but, we can work outside of the home now. We can have aspirations for ourselves. But ultimately, there is still this sense that women need to be the caretakers of the children and be home. And yeah, maybe you can have it all. Maybe that's okay for women to try to have families and careers. But I don't know anybody who can do it successfully all at once, right? It's just too much. So I really did have to think a lot about my own marriage, and I have an 11-year-old daughter. You know, what I'm modeling for her, because we do have a more traditional setup where I work from home, so I'm the one who's often doing those domestic tasks, even though I'm working full time. So it was a really interesting for me personally, but also to explore the differences and the similarities. You know, even though they're 60 years apart.
And, it's funny, reading that, there was the language that you used in that, there's a part there, where, she says, oh, he says to her, well, I'll take care of you. And we sort of, fall into that, like, that, yes, great. My knight in shining armor is here to take care of me. And, it just opens up these questions about how much of that is learned, that how much of that is evolutionary. All of these questions start to play into this book. I thought it's so far, like, I haven't finished it. I think it's brilliant. And as I said to you, that you do have this one chapter in there between two of the characters, Nellie and Richard, that really just gave me chills, because you sort of set the tone for this underlying tension, I guess, in this relationship. So did you do a lot of research into how a relationship like that would work?
I did, and I did a lot of research into relationships in the 50s, and looking at the dynamics between the husbands and wives and what was expected. I also just, I think when I'm writing, I have a marriage where I have a very supportive partner. And so, I am not like Nellie and Richard in that 1950s relationship where there are expectations of her, and he's very controlling and manipulative, especially behind closed doors. But I have this tendency to just try to imagine, I put myself in that character, and I try to picture these scenes and imagine if I want her to feel just that thumb of his just sitting on her shoulder, what do I need to do, and what do I need to inject into the story to make that work? And so I almost kind of live out the scenes for myself as I'm writing. And then that, of course, is informed by research and other anecdotes, that people have given me about their own relationships. And so it's sometimes it's heavy when you're doing that kind of writing, because you really do have to take it on and feel it deeply so that it comes out on the page the way that you want.
So you just finished your first nonfiction book.
Yes.
And so that comes out in December. And so what is this book about?
This book is about, well, I am a writer who gets up at 5 a.m. to do all of my creative writing. And I've been doing that for years and years. All my books have been written that way. And so in part, this book is about the idea that, hey, if you want to try to reclaim some time in your life, we're all so busy. No one has time. It feels to do anything anymore. But we all probably have these aspirations, and things like maybe writing a book or learning an instrument or learning a new language, things that we wish we could do that we don't have time for. And so the book is really about looking at your time and taking ownership back over your time, so it's not owning you, and finding those spaces where you can do that thing that you've always wanted to do, but maybe haven't been able to find a place for it in your life. So I do use my own story about how I have written my novels and how I started getting up at 5 a.m. and why I think you should do it too, and how you can do that, but also looking at other people and how they have, and research around, why the morning is a good time to do that and to find that time. So yeah, it's just that overall, it's a big ball of like, how can you better own your time so that it does not own you?
Okay, excellent. So speaking of time, we all have lots of it on our hands right now. So if people want to find your books or more about you, where can they go?
I'm on Instagram a lot because it's a very happy place to be. I find these days everyone's making bread, it seems. So I spend a lot of time looking through people's bread feeds. But my handle on both Instagram and Twitter is at Karma K Brown, and I am pretty active in both places and always happy to chat books. And I share books that I'm reading. recommendations and other writerly things. So yeah, I'm always happy to see people over there.
And do you have a book you're reading right now you'd like to recommend?
I just finished the book, but it's not coming out until 2021, but it was amazing. It's called The Push, and it is a psychological drama about motherhood. And it is just, I still can't quite process it. So anyway, it's called The Push. Look for it in 2021, which I know is so long from now.
Well, I think we'll have you back before then to remind us of that.
Probably. But that's the one I just finished. So it's still very top of mind for me. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Karma.
Thank you.